We're living through very difficult times. Our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land suffered such unimaginable horrors. Thousands are still going through hell, not even knowing where their loved ones are they alive or dead, and how they are being treated. To those who have suffered and continue to suffer, I have no words. I can only cry with you and assure you that we're thinking about you day and night and praying to God to somehow make things right. To all the rest of us who are feeling the pain of our brothers and sisters and are anxious and nervous about our situation, I have three very important messages, which I'm going to divide into 2 videos. The 3 messages are: it's over, and it's over. Message number 1, which is the topic of this video, is that it's time to once and for all bury our delusion that after the Holocaust, the non-Jewish world will finally understand the suffering of the Jews, perpetrated by Christians and Muslims for the past 2,000 years, and will never entertain the possibility of repeating it. There are Holocaust museums all over the world. I think America has 16 of them, plus countless memorials. There are also thousands of books and films that have been produced. But we were delusional. We also ignored specific prophecies throughout the Bible that are clear and unequivocal. The nations of the world will not tolerate our existence until after Mashiach comes, full stop. So message number 1, our delusions are over. And actually, that's very good news, because it is clear in the prophecies that realization itself will be the precursor for the coming of Mashiach. In the second video, I will discuss message number 2. The secular Zionist dream of Theodor Herzl is over, and why that too is very good news. Message number 3, and this is the most important one: Satan's mission to divide the Jewish people and to separate us from one another and to separate us from God is finally over and done with. And that's the best news, and it gives us tremendous hope. So let's begin. What President Biden did this past Wednesday on October 18th in Israel boggles the mind. How this man, who continuously boasts about his strong support for Israel and the Jews and his ironclad commitment to be there for us, how this 80-year-old man was motivated to fly 6,000 miles, and in the midst of the excruciating pain being felt by the thousands who are affected directly by the monsters of Hamas, and those who are living through the hell of not even knowing what happened to their loved ones, how this guy schleps all the way to Israel to tell a grieving and anxious nation that he cares more about the Hamas supporting civilians of Gaza than about little babies, terrified children, frail grandmothers who are ruthlessly captured and being held by sadistic monsters. It's simply beyond belief. Practically every Jew in Israel, and probably at least 1 million Americans, have relatives or friends that are in the army. I personally have 39 cousins currently serving. May Hashem protect them together with all their comrades. All these holy and incredible, courageous soldiers are eagerly willing to risk their lives to protect us. And their parents, their spouses and children, and all their relatives and friends are obviously very proud of their bravery and their Avos Yisrael. But they're also understandably very, very nervous. So this piece of garbage comes to Israel with a message that Jewish lives, doesn't mean that much to me. It's not rocket science to pick up this ugly message loud and clear, not only between the lines of his phony words of support and empathy, but more so by his despicable actions. He didn't come to Israel to offer his assistance in our 100-year battle against vicious, Jew-hating, bloodthirsty Islamic Nazis surrounding us on all sides. He came to protect our enemies and imperil the lives of the hostages, the men, women, babies, and children, the frail and the elderly. Israel understood correctly that there was only one way to ensure the immediate release of our brothers and sisters from the clutches of their bloodthirsty, sadistic captors. No food, no water, no electricity to the 2 million residents of Gaza until every single hostage is returned, full stop. If America, leading the Western world, would have proclaimed loud and clear that Israel's demands are the most moral path any country can take to save its people, and that America is fully behind it, and that any country, including all Arab and Muslim majority countries with ties to America, that do not put enormous pressure on Hamas to comply, they'll be severely sanctioned for their complacency in this horrific tragedy. And that if any resident of Gaza does die from hunger, that blood is 1,000% on the hands of Hamas and on all the countries that did not force Hamas to comply, and that the blame will not in any shape or form rest on Israel. And if Iran, who financed and trained the monsters who committed and continued to commit these crimes, does not immediately order their subordinates in Gaza to release the captives, sanctions 10 times as severe as the ones imposed by Trump will immediately be imposed on them. Had Biden done all that, our precious brothers and sisters would all be back home by now. But he did the exact opposite. Not only that, he told the entire world that in his opinion, the Jews are not much better than Hamas. He clearly indicated that it's entirely possible that the Jews deliberately targeted a hospital in which hundreds were killed. Of course, the whole thing was a big lie. Not only weren't the Jews involved, but not too many people were killed, if any. But the fact that our supposedly closest ally, as well as every single media outlet in the world, accepted Hamas on their word, after they have repeatedly proven to be filthy liars, only underscores how by and large the entire world is against us and will always be, no matter what, until Mashiach comes. Biden added that it would seem from preliminary reports from American intelligence that this time the other team was responsible. The other team? Are you out of your freaking mind? Is this a baseball game between morally equivalent teams? Are you actually entertaining the possibility that the Jews are capable of doing something like that, deliberately? The Americans incinerated Hiroshima and Nagasaki, along with their hospitals, their kindergartens, and their old age homes. In contrast, the Jews go through enormous effort to avoid civilian casualties, even as Hamas goes through enormous effort to make sure that they are killed. Are you actually saying that you're not sure that the Israelis are saying the truth and that essentially you trust the lies consistently spewed forth by the Gazans as much as you trust the Jews? And that it is only that in this particular case, your intelligence organizations have confirmed that this time the Israelis are probably telling the truth. Can you begin to understand the viciousness of this rotten piece of garbage who calls himself Israel's best friend and is praised to high heaven by so many clueless Jews? Do you realize how much this emboldens our enemies and encourages them to keep murdering Jews? Because there is zero consequences from America and the world? He threatened Israel that if they dare refuse his demands to immediately let dozens of trucks ostensibly packed with humanitarian aid, but without a doubt also containing ammunition for Hamas. If Israel does not comply with his cruel orders, America will not provide the vital equipment and ammunition Israel needs to protect itself. First, he sent his Jewish capo, Anthony Blinken, who lectured and threatened Netanyahu and his cabinet for 7 hours about the dire consequences they will suffer if they do not surrender to America's diabolical agenda. But then the 80-year-old Joe, who can hardly walk or string together a coherent sentence, couldn't resist coming in person so that he could take the credit for this amazing accomplishment of forcing the Jews into compliance. And then he goes on to announce that he's sending 100 million of American taxpayers' dollars into Gaza for humanitarian aid. Everybody knows that humanitarian aid is pure baloney. Hamas controls everything and anything in Gaza. The hospitals, the schools, the police department, the fire department, the garbage department, you name it. Are we supposed to believe that when you hand them $100 million and ask them to please only use it for good things, that these evil monsters would have any intention to comply? And even if you're stupid enough to believe that they would, wouldn't that free up another $100 million that they have in the other pocket to fund their murderous jihad against the Jews? How insensitive for this creep to talk about his compassion for Jews, for Jew-hating Gazans, while hundreds of families in Israel cannot even bury their dead because they were so badly mutilated as to be unidentifiable as yet. Actually, there is nothing surprising about the behavior of our most trusted ally, the glorious US of A, at least to anyone who is familiar with recent history. They abandoned us during the Holocaust. They abandoned us during the War of Independence. They snatched victory away from us in every single successive war waged against us by our vicious, bloodthirsty Islamic neighbors. And they brought upon us the horrors of Oslo, which resulted in over 1,000 Jews, men, women, and little children brutally murdered on our buses, blown to bits in pizza shops under direct orders from a monster named Arafat, the ugly monster who the American administration and State Department embraced with admiration and affection, and always received a hero's welcome at the UN. The godfather of the PLO, the very same entity that Biden insists are responsible and peace-loving. They should be given control over Gaza if and when the Jews succeed to oust Hamas. Anyone who expected the American government to change their colors after the horrible, vicious massacre of Simchas Torah is simply delusional. Well-meaning Jews are working day and night to show the world the atrocities perpetrated by subhuman Islamic monsters. Pictures of hostages, the little babies and children, the elderly and the weak, cruelly held in captivity, are meant to elicit the world's compassion. They should definitely continue their holy work, and may God bless them, because there are probably some uneducated and decent people who might be affected by this knowledge. But by and large, most of the world couldn't care less. In fact, I think the message is in some way counterproductive. Because when the emphasis is on a specific entity called Hamas and not on the vicious, bloodthirsty hatred boiling in the hearts of millions of Islamic Nazis surrounding us on all sides, including the majority of the residents of Gaza, who are fully on the same page as the monsters who perpetrated the Simchas Torah atrocities. When we put the entire focus on Hamas, the world will insist that after their demise, in the highly unlikely scenario that it does occur, we have the moral obligation to hand over control of Gaza to the peace-loving monster terrorist Mahmoud Abbas, Yamach Shemai, or some other Islamic Nazi. Even if the civilians of Gaza were totally innocent, if they had not, by their own volition, brought Hamas to power and continued to support them and celebrate the murder and torture of Jews, it would still be entirely moral for the Jews to demand the release of the hostages before any food or water is allowed into Gaza. Sometimes the only way to win a war is by involving the general population of our enemies. What America did to the Japanese civilians living in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was 1,000,000 times more aggressive than what Israel is attempting to do. Nobody questioned the morality of burning alive 150,000 civilians plus who knows how many tens of thousands who were wounded and handicapped for life. It was done to save the lives of thousands of U.S. soldiers whose lives would have been lost conquering Japan with conventional weapons. It was actually the only way to end the war quickly and decisively. It saved not only American lives, but also Japanese lives. The Allies did the same to the Germans, deliberately targeting tens of thousands of civilians. But Israel was not threatening to deliberately kill anybody, innocent or not. It was simply applying pressure which would force Hamas to release our brothers and sisters from their horrible captivity. The misery of Jews, as well as the lack of supplies to Gaza, would have been over in 1 minute. But Israel's dear friend and supporter, the Honorable Joe Biden, had to personally make sure that whereas any Western country, or any country in the world, would do what it has to do to win a war and bring back its captives, he would not allow Israel to do so. In the Talmud in Sanhedrin 98b, the Gemara records a statement from 3 Talmudic giants, Ula, Rav Yosef, and Rav Yochanan, Yesi v'lo yichmine. We hope Mashiach comes, but we do not want to be there. Why? Because the suffering will be too great to bear. The Talmud says that even God will have difficulty dealing with it. You should note that it's recorded in the Talmud in Brachot 5a that Rabbi Yochanan lost 10 of his children in his lifetime. Not only was he able to deal with it, but he made it his mission to visit others who suffered the loss of a child, and he gave them the strength to deal with it. Yet, this very same Rabbi Yochanan was fearful that he wouldn't be able to deal with the pain and suffering the Jews will have to endure before the revelation of Mashiach, and he was hoping that he would miss the most glorious moment in the history of mankind, when our long-awaited Redeemer will emerge, if that also entailed experiencing the horrors that preceded his coming. However, we were not given that choice. For whatever reason, we were chosen to be here and experience these horrors. And as well, we will experience the glorious arrival of Mashiach at any moment. But we need to appreciate why we were chosen, which I hope will become at least a little bit clearer as we proceed to try to understand where we are standing in the process of redemption, and as we try to move forward with great pain but with determination and resolve to do what has to be done in these final moments of exile. To my precious brothers and sisters who are suffering, I have no words to convey. I can only cry with you and pray for you. But to the rest of us whose lives have not been thoroughly torn to pieces, but who feel the pain of their brethren, and who are scared and anxious and seek to understand what is going on and where we are headed, I ask you permission to share with you some of my thoughts. Be'ezras Achayni L'Adam Das. So let's begin. The horrors of Simchas Torah were prophesied and indeed read out loud in every synagogue in the world shortly before they occurred. We have discussed in previous videos that the War of Gog and Magog is not a single episode, but a series of wars fought on many fronts, both on the battlefield, in the halls of government, and in all forms of public media. The wars were prophesied to begin before Mashiach comes, as soon as the Jews take control of Jerusalem, and indeed they began 2 hours after the miraculous victory of the Six-Day War in 1967, as I will explain later on. And the wars are only concluded after the redemption unfolds under the leadership of Mashiach ben David. These wars are referenced in many places throughout the 24 books of the Bible, as well as in hundreds of post-biblical classic Jewish texts. The primary sources in the Bible are the book of Zechariah, chapters 12 to 14, and the book of Yecheskel, chapter 38 to 39. Parts of the account in Zechariah are read in every synagogue all over the world on the first day of Sukkot. The account in Yecheskel is only read when there is a Shabbos on the intermediate days of Chol Hamoed Sukkot, which did not occur this year. The reason why the accounts of these wars are read on Sukkot is because we have an ancient tradition that it is precisely on Sukkot when a major escalation of these wars will occur. This might seem very odd because Sukkot is the only Jewish holiday that is connected to all of mankind, not only the Jews. For over 800 years, when the first and second temple stood in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount, the priests would offer 70 sacrifices on Sukkot to enlist God's mercy and benevolence upon the 70 non-Jewish nations of the world. This is explicit in the Torah in Numbers chapter 29. And in the future, both Jews and non-Jews will celebrate Sukkot, as explicit in chapter 14 in the book of Zechariah. Now, the wars of Gog and Magog are when all of humanity wages war against the Jews in Jerusalem, as described in Zechariah chapter 12. So the question is, why would all the Gentile nations attack us on the very holiday during which we're trying to ensure that they have a healthy, successful, and prosperous year? The answer is simple. Pure arrogance and an insane lust for power and dominance. During the high holidays in Sukkot, God reaffirms his eternal and unbreakable commitment to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people reaffirm our unbreakable commitment to him, a commitment to follow his Torah and mitzvahs, and to transform the world into a holy and godly place. This commitment entails enormous self-sacrifice. God repeats over and over throughout the 24 books of the Bible that the Jews will suffer tremendously from a world hostile to his and our agenda, which is to make the world a godly place and a place of unity and selflessness. God did not exclude any human being from taking part in this holy mission. In fact, he asked every other nation if they are willing to join before he solidified his covenant with the Jews at Sinai. But they all responded loud and clear, choose someone else. God explained to them that the reward for accepting this important mission, which is actually the whole reason the world was created in the first place, would be worth the sacrifice, because whoever takes on this mission will have a unique and unparalleled relationship with God for all eternity. Thank you, but no thank you, said the guardian angels of all the 70 nations. Find someone else. The reward is not worth the trouble. However, once the Jews accepted upon themselves this mission, a profound sense of hatred and jealousy consumed the metaphysical core of all the nations. They knew that one day the Jews will rule the world and be the sole source of light, inspiration, blessing, and prosperity for all mankind. They were well aware that the Jews would not use their chosen position to subjugate others, but rather to uplift them, to educate them, and to bring out the best in them. So why would the fact that somebody will be the source of your blessings cause such immense jealousy and hatred? Furthermore, even after the Jews accepted God's mission, the door was left open for any Gentile to join them at any time and to become part of the Jewish people. So why hate us? If you think we got a good deal, you simply can join us, and you'll be exactly the same. And in fact, in some ways, a righteous convert is even greater than a Jew, as explained by Maimonides in his famous letter to a righteous convert. Welcome to the dark side of human nature. The lust for honor and power can drive people insane. People will waste their lives and destroy their relationships to get it. When you are dependent on somebody else for your own success and blessing, the ugly face of arrogance can cause you to turn against the very person who graciously provides you with your needs. So it is specifically on this holiday, when we pray to God to shower his blessing upon the nations of the world, it is then and precisely then that the wrath and ugly face of arrogance and jealousy explodes with ferocious intensity. Now, the two accounts of the wars of Gog and Magog in Yechezkel and Zechariah are quite different. They represent two overlapping, both actual and metaphysical wars against the Jews. The one in Zechariah refers primarily to the phase before Mashiach comes, and the one in Yechezkel primarily to the final phase, which will occur after the coming of Mashiach. Some of the essential differences between the two accounts are as follows. In Zechariah, the war is primarily against Jerusalem. The Jews will suffer many casualties. Their women will be raped. There will be many captives. Homes will be destroyed. And the mourning over the victims will be enormous. In Zechariah 12, verses 10 to 13, and 14, verse 2, you'll see everything I just told you. This is the story we read this year on the first day of Sukkot, and the one we tragically experienced on the last day. In Yechezkel, the war is miraculous and there are no Jewish casualties, but enormous numbers of our attackers will be eliminated. We did not read this account this year, and we'll discuss it in another time. So let's focus on the text in Zechariah that we did read. I would strongly suggest that you have the book of Zechariah in front of you so you could see the words inside for yourself. If you don't have one conveniently accessible, you could go online. If you Google Tanakh, Tanach, and Chabad.org, Chabad.org, you'll find all the 24 books of the Bible in Hebrew with an English translation side by side. Or you could go to Sefaria.org, Sefaria.org. We mentioned previously that it is on the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, that God and the Jews reaffirmed their commitment to each other, and that this elicits enormous hatred and jealousy in the metaphysical core of all the nations who feel they are left out of this relationship. Although, as I stressed earlier, the option to join the Jewish people is always open to anybody. The apex of the high holidays culminates on the last day, which in the land of Israel is both Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. On that day, no sacrifices are brought for the Gentiles, only for the Jews. It is an intimate day in which no one other than the Jews are invited to participate. This year, it fell out on Shabbat, a day which further underscores the unique relationship between God and the Jews. Because although non-Jews are allowed to fulfill other commandments of the Torah, they are forbidden to keep the Shabbat in its entirety. Furthermore, we are currently in extreme proximity to the final redemption, when the role of the Jews will be clear to all. So it was precisely this year that the uniqueness of the Jewish people was manifest metaphysically in the deepest way, and which in turn unleashed a horrific display of vengeance. Zechariah emphasizes that the focus is on Jerusalem. It's a religious war. It's a war over the Temple Mount and symbolically over the fact that the Jews were chosen to administer the Holy Temple on the Temple Mount. That's where blessing flows to the entire world. And it's through their praise and sacrifice in the Holy Temple that elicit God's blessing to the rest of humanity. And that's why the flags of Hamas and the PLO. Today they use a more sanitized name, the PA, but they're the same bloodthirsty terrorists. The only difference between Haj Amin al-Husseini, who is the founder of modern-day Islamic war against the Jews and Hitler's close confidant, and Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, is the clothing they wear, but all three of them share the same dark and ugly heart and soul. In any case, both of them, Hamas and the PLO, have the Temple Mount at the center of their flags, and it is the core of their battle, as they emphasize repeatedly in their speeches and writings. So let's read on. Let's discover how Zechariah, prophesying in Jerusalem 2,500 years ago, when the Jews were just about to commence the building of the Second Temple, envisions what we are going through today with incredible accuracy and clarity. Chapter 12, verse 2, Behold, I will make Jerusalem into a cup of poison for all the surrounding nations. It is clear to Zechariah that all nations surrounding Israel will join the war against the Jewish hold on Jerusalem. It's not just Hamas. This is obvious to everyone, except, of course, the government of America, Europe, all other nations of the UN, plus all the other blind fools or deliberate Jew haters. Everybody is siding with Hamas in this war. It's not only Iran. We'll see when we discuss the prophecies in Yechezkel. Iran is singled out in Yechezkel because it's the greatest of our foes and they are the most powerful and dangerous. But Zechariah doesn't single out any particular nation. He lumps them all together. All the nations around Israel, because they are essentially on the same page. This includes, of course, Egypt and Jordan, with whom we ostensibly have some kind of peace agreement, as well as Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, all of them, and even our good buddies in the United Emirates, who are happy to do business with us and enjoy collecting money from hundreds of thousands of Israelis who come there annually to do business and to vacation. They're happy to welcome us, build synagogues for us, and even open kosher restaurants for us. whatever it takes to keep us coming and investing in their economy. When it comes to standing with us against vicious Islamic monsters, they're completely oblivious to the horrors we suffered and are squarely behind our enemies. Filthy rich Saudi Arabia, about who our delusional prime minister recently announced that they were about to embrace Israel. And in his ridiculous fantasy, such a historic embrace would once and for all end the 100-year war pitting Islamic world against the Jews who control Eretz Yisrael. Our future peace partners are also squarely behind our enemies in this horrible time. The prophet Zechariah saw all of this with absolute clarity. He exposes the stupidity of assuming that we will be one iota safer by forging financial ties with our Arab neighbors. And Zechariah also assures us that they will all be severely punished. The war against Jerusalem is like drinking a cup of poison. The horrible deaths they will suffer from drinking this poison on account of the support and encouragement of the subhuman monsters who perpetrated the atrocities of Simchas Torah, as well as all previous barbaric Islamic attacks on Jews and on Eretz Yisrael, are explicit in chapter 14, verse 12. Read it yourself. It's very gruesome. But the prophet continues in verse 3. On that day I will make Jerusalem into a burdensome stone for all the nations. All those who lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations on earth will gather against her. Here the prophet predicts another incredible phenomena. Even the nations far away from Israel, who could not care less about who controls the Temple Mount, even the nations who have nothing to gain from sucking up to our enemies, will side with them regardless. The world, which has gained enormously from Jewish innovation in every sphere of human progress, in medicine, technology, science, you name it. And sadly, most of the Christian world, who would still be pagans if not for the Jews who brought the Hebrew Bible and ethical monotheism to the world. Every Christian country, without exception, for no reason whatsoever, will in one way or another support brutal and vicious Islamic fascism, which is hell-bent on destroying Christianity together with Judaism. The end of all the supporters of our enemies will also be painful. They will be severely injured, but not on the same level as the horrible deaths which will be meted out to the Muslims, who are directly involved in this vicious attack against us. I need to stress the obvious. Although governments of particularly every country in the world are against us, there are tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of non-Jewish Christians, as well as many, many members of all faiths, or those with no faith at all, who are supporting us with their heart and soul. There are also Muslims and Arabs who are on our side. I'm not sure how many, but unfortunately they have no power or significant influence over the rest. We all know there are many Bedouins and Druze who joined the IDF and risked their lives for us. May God bless and protect them. But in any case, it goes without saying that all righteous Gentiles will share all the blessings together with us when the Mashiach comes. I'll conclude part 1 with an important message for my Jewish brothers and sisters and for all Gentiles. Our current world is divided into 3 parts. Zechariah clearly depicts this. In chapter 13, verse 8, throughout the world declares God, 2/3 will be cut off and die, but the third will remain. I will bring that third into fire and refine them as one refines metal, examine them as one examines gold. He will call in my name and I will answer him. I will say, you are my people, and he will say, Hashem is my God. Group number 1 are those that are directly involved in murdering Jews, whether by action, funding, training, and even just encouraging, inciting, and supporting these miserable, bloodthirsty, subhuman monsters. All these subhumans are Amalek, and they will be wiped off the face of the earth in a gruesome way, as detailed in chapter 14, verse 12. The second group is large. It includes all those who, while not directly endorsing the murder and suffering of the Jews, turn a blind eye to it. They minimize it and do everything possible to restrict the Jews from protecting themselves. I'm not going to go into detail what motivates them, but it makes no difference. Without them, the first group would not exist. So they bear full responsibility. They do not deserve to live in a world of Mashiach. They will be cut off. The end of this group is detailed in Ezekiel chapter 39. The third group is everybody else, except of course the Jews and the righteous Gentiles who have come out firmly on the side of the Jewish people, and for all intents and purposes will enjoy all the blessings together with the Jews. They are not included in any of these groups. But the third group is basically those who did nothing. This group needs to go through a process of refinement and examination to determine their status and their future. We'll talk about this a little more in a future video. I will encourage all of those who are on the fence to do whatever they can to exclude themselves, obviously from the first 2 groups, but even from the third group, and come out publicly and unequivocally, not with meaningless condemnations of Hamas, but with unequivocal support for the Jewish people, and not only against a specific group of Islamic Nazis, but against all the hundreds of millions of Muslims and Christians who deny the entire theme of the 24 books of the Hebrew Bible, which is essentially God's unequivocal, irrevocable, and eternal promise to the Jewish people that the entire land of Israel, every square inch, will be the eternal inheritance of the Jews, and the Jews only until the end of time. And lastly, that the Jews and only the Jews will rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount, which will serve as a source of blessing and prosperity for all of humanity on the face of the earth. I'll see you soon, Emir Hashem, with part 2. Meanwhile, may we witness Yeshua's Hashem Geherafine, the salvation of God in the blink of an eye.